Mic on. Oh, yeah. Thanks. Yeah, they did. As you know, there's concern of everybody on this committee about crypto and what we do, and making sure that consumers are protected. Some in this town are less interested in protecting consumers and investors than others. Big institutions usually dominate, as you know, the complex derivatives market that CFTC currently oversees. If Congress expands the CFTC's jurisdiction, how will the agency look out for consumers?
Senator, thanks for the question. I think there's two components which I think are important, and I understand, appreciate, and I've heard the same concerns about the CFTC's jurisdiction, who our sort of main constituency is, and how this would challenge us to sort of be a more retail-oriented agency. But I'll challenge that point in two ways. First on enforcement, and then just generally on regulation. And I mentioned this earlier, but on enforcement, if you look at our enforcement record really over decades, it's split into two major buckets. One is manipulation of markets, and then the other is fraud. And you could put non-compliance on the manipulation side. And on the manipulation side, that's typically what you're talking about, large financial institutions. This is, as you recall, and I'm sure Senator Grassley does as well, the committee writ large, manipulation of large benchmarks. This is the LIBOR cases, which actually originated at the CFTC almost 15 years ago. Other off-channel or offline communications, big cases against large financial institutions. But on the fraud side of the ledger of enforcement, the fraud cases we bring are very typically retail-oriented. And I mentioned this to the chairwoman. Typically, Forex, which is foreign exchange fraud, is very retail-oriented, and also physical commodity fraud around metals, so specifically gold and silver. If you look at our fraud docket, most of it is retail-oriented. These are pump and dumps, Ponzi schemes, very typical boiler room type of fraud, and it is very typically directed at vulnerable retail investors. So over the course of decades, because of this very typical fraudulent activity directed towards retail investors, we've built a very robust Office of Consumer Education and Outreach, and we have a very vast network of partners at the state and local level, other regulators and law enforcement, to reach out to these local individuals who are vulnerable. So as much as I appreciate if we do get authority, we're gonna have to perhaps change the way we send word out through social media, the internet, and interact with retail. I actually do think on the enforcement side, we have a very strong record of retail enforcement in respect to the fraud cases that we've brought over many years.
Thank you. Let me talk a little bit about hacks on some crypto platforms. We've seen hundreds of millions of dollars lost. There's no question. We need to protect consumers. What lessons have you learned, Mr. Chair? What lessons has CFTC learned from past breaches and hacks in crypto markets?
Senator, thanks for the question. I think, in many respects, these asset classes trade very similarly to other asset classes, stocks, bonds, and other futures contracts. But in many respects, and I think this really gets to the point of your question, the technology is very unique and different and forces us to ask very different questions around cybersecurity and operational resilience. So as we see these hacks which enable fraudsters and ransomware attacks to hold collateral or hold fiat money and use Bitcoin or cryptocurrency as ransom, we are doing everything we can to ensure that we both at the agency level, but as we work with market participants, thinking about cybersecurity and operational resilience as a priority in this space.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And Senator from Mexico, thank you very much.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.